The 20th century.
New opportunities for women. Southern blacks, realizing that wartime manufacturing was created jobs in the North, migrated to the big cities. 2 years after America's entry, the Germans were ready to negotiate a peace treaty. Wilson wanted the war treaty to be guided by his 14 points. The European allies wanted a peace settlement that punished Germany. The Senate rejected the treaty and American participation in the League of Nations. America was receding into a period of isolationism. The Roaring Twenties coincided with the return to normalcy promised in the 1920 election by Warren G. Harding. Normalcy in business meant a laissez-faire attitude, pro-business attitude.
1. Passing the Fordney-McCumber Tariff. 2. In promoting foreign trade through providing huge loans to the post-war Allied governments, who returned the favor by buying U.S.-produced goods and foodstuffs. And 3. By cracking down on strikes.
Once the war was over, farmers were left with surplus goods.
Lobbied for the federal government to buy the excess. Coolidge vetoed the bill twice. 1929, Congress established the Farm Board to buy surpluses and maintain prices, but farmers continued to grow as much as they wanted.
Harding administration is remembered for its scandals. Teapot Dome scandal, reserve land with rich oil, deposits had been set aside under the jurisdiction of the Navy Department. Involved a member of Harding's cabinet, 2 oil speculators, and large bribes to open the reserve for drilling. 20s, also known as the Jazz Age, the Great Migration had transformed parts of some northern cities into all-black neighborhoods. Flowering of African American culture called the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem attracted African American writers, artists, musicians from all around. Henry Ford perfected the assembly line and mass production, which lowered the cost of automobiles, allowed those who worked in the cities to move farther away from city centers, thus giving birth to the suburbs. Radio followed automobiles in changing the nation's culture. As more houses gained access to electric power, household appliances sales boomed. Advertising industry grew up during the decade. Temperance movement. By 1917, 2/3 of the state had passed laws prohibiting the consumption of alcohol. With the entrance of the United States into World War I, prohibitionist forces cloaked themselves in the mantle of patriotism.
1. Prohibition would shift thousands of tons of grain from liquor manufacture to war uses. 2. Alcoholism led to drunkenness, and a drunken man was of no use to the war effort. And 3. Most breweries and whiskey distilleries were owned by Germans. In 1917, Congress passed the 18th Amendment, and the states ratified it by 1919.
The large-scale manufacture and smuggling of alcohol became the business of organized crime. Prohibition was repealed in 1933. Red Scare at the end of war also resulted in legislation restricting immigration. 1921, the Immigration Restriction Act was passed in 1924, the National Origins Act, aimed at restricting immigrants from Southern and Central Europe and Asia. Resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan anti-Catholic sentiment was a factor in the 1928 election. All Smith lost. Smith had other liabilities. He was a product of New York City machine. Hoover ran on his record of public service and on Republican prosperity. The Great Depression. Herbert Hoover took office in 1928. Lots of speculation in the stock market, but that was just one of a number of problems.
Among the weaknesses in the United States economy, 1. The amount of stock being bought on margin. 2. Depressed agricultural prices. 3. The unequal distribution of wealth. 5% of the population provided the nation's investment capital and the majority of its purchasing power. 4. The tax policies that contributed to the unequal distribution of wealth. 5. The expansion of business. 6. Easy-to-get installment credit. 7. The size and influence on segments of the economy of holding companies. 8. The weakness of the banking system because of many small and mismanaged banks. 9. High tariffs that closed off foreign markets. 10. The Allies' insistence on collecting war debts that depressed foreign trade, especially for U.S. foodstuffs. Overproduction and underconsumption joined to create financial problems for businesses that now found themselves with surplus inventory and their own loans to meet. By the fall of 1929, more than $7 billion had been borrowed to buy stocks on margin. Many stocks were hugely overvalued. Professional speculators began to cash out of the market in September. After the crash, many stocks were worthless. People lost their life savings. Banks foreclosed on loans and mortgages. When the borrowers could not repay their loans, the banks went under. Businesses went bankrupt as inventories piled up. Hoover believed the Depression would be short-lived. He authorized the funding of the Home Loan Bank Act and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Hoover believed 1. Helping the unemployed was the responsibility of churches, private agencies, and local and state governments. 2. That giving a handout to the unemployed would destroy their self-respect and individual initiative. 3. That a federal relief program would bankrupt the nation. 4. That a federal relief program would dangerously enlarge the power of the federal government and create a bloated bureaucracy. Farmers organized farm committees to prevent creditors from foreclosing on their neighbors. 1932, some 20,000 unemployed veterans descended on Washington, D.C., demanding payment of bonus not due until 1945. Shots were fired. Hoover dispatched the Capitol Police to remove the veterans. General Douglas MacArthur, who had been told to stand ready in case of trouble, ordered troops and tanks into the fray. Andrew Mellor cut excess profits tax, taxed the poor rather than the rich to stimulate investment. Key terms and ideas: anti-Semitism, prejudice against Hebrews, consumer culture, the purchase of automobiles, radio, movies, sports. In trials involving evolution: the Sacco-Vanzetti case, the Scopes trial, evolution, William Jennings Bryan, religious fundamentalism.